My mother-in-law raised her glass, smiled, and said I should quit the Navy because real women don't hide behind desks in uniform, and everyone laughed, including my husband, who added that I'd never seen real action, that I was just good at signing papers, and for a second I thought he would stop himself, but he didn't. He looked straight at me and said it again, slower, like he wanted it to land, and the room filled with quiet laughter that felt heavier than any words I'd ever heard. And I just sat there, hands still, saying nothing, while my entire place in that family collapsed in front of me. And if this story speaks to your heart, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from, your city or your country, and tell me your local time right now, only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 42 years old, and that night at a family dinner in Arlington, Virginia, was the night everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my place in that family changed completely. And it didn't start with shouting or fighting. It started quietly, the way these things always do, with small comments that everyone pretends are harmless, but never are. It was Daniel's promotion dinner, held in his parents' house, a large colonial-style home just outside the city. The kind of place with perfectly trimmed hedges and a long dining table that always made you feel like you were being measured. His mother, Margaret, had spent the entire afternoon preparing, everything polished, everything arranged, everything controlled. And from the moment I walked in, I could feel it. The same subtle tension I had felt for years. The polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I wore a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy, just something appropriate for a family dinner. My hair pulled back the way I always wore it when I wasn't on base. I greeted everyone the same way I always did, calm, respectful, controlled. But it never seemed to matter, because to them, I had always been the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit into their version of success. They talked about investments, properties, expansions, numbers that filled the room with a kind of confidence I had never needed to prove. And every time I tried to join the conversation, it shifted, subtly, like the current had changed direction, until eventually, I stopped trying. Dinner started smoothly, plates passed, glasses filled, conversations overlapping, in that familiar rhythm of family gatherings. And for a moment, I thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight they would see me as part of this family, not someone standing just outside of it. But then Margaret leaned back in her chair, looked at me with that same composed smile and said, "Rachel, I've always wondered, do you ever plan on doing something more practical with your career?" And the table went quiet for just a second, just long enough for everyone to look at me, waiting, measuring, and I felt Daniel shift slightly beside me, like he knew where this was going. But he didn't stop it. He didn't say anything. He just picked up his glass and waited. And that's when I realized this wasn't a question. It was an opening, and everything that followed was already decided. No one answered her right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to make the question feel heavier than it sounded, like something already decided. And I placed my fork down carefully, not because I did not have an answer, but because I knew this was not about my answer at all. It was about what they wanted to hear. Margaret tilted her head slightly, still smiling, waiting, and then Daniel let out a small laugh under his breath, the kind he used when he thought something was obvious, and he said, "Mom, you know Rachel. She likes structure, rules, paperwork. It is safe for her." And a few people at the table chuckled, quietly at first, then more openly. His brother leaned back in his chair and added, "So basically, a desk job with a uniform." And someone across the table said, "I always thought Navy meant ships and deployments, not office work." And the laughter grew, not loud but steady, comfortable, like this was something they had all agreed on long before tonight. I felt my fingers tighten slightly against my lap, but my face stayed still. I did not interrupt. I did not defend. I just listened as they built a version of my life that was easier for them to understand, easier to dismiss. Margaret took a sip of her wine and said, "It is just that, Rachel, you are a smart woman. You could do so much more if you stepped into something that actually builds a future, something visible." She gestured lightly toward Daniel, toward the house, toward everything they valued. And then she added, almost gently, "A family needs stability, not uncertainty." And for a second, no one spoke, but the meaning settled across the table, clear and deliberate. Daniel nodded again. this time more openly, and said, "She has always been like this, independent, but at some point, you have to think long term." And that word stayed in the air, long term, like I was the one failing to understand something basic. I turned my head slightly and looked at him, really looked, waiting for even a small sign that he would soften it, that he would say something to balance what had just been said. But he did not. He just avoided my eyes and reached for his glass. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing somewhere deep where no one else could hear it. The conversation moved on, but not really, because now everything they said carried that same tone, subtle, layered. His sister started talking about a friend who had left the military and finally started a real career. His father mentioned how discipline was useful, as long as it translated into something profitable, and each sentence landed with that same underlying message, that I was temporary, that what I had built meant less because it did not fit their definition of success. I noticed the way a few of the guests watched me, not unkindly, but curiously, like they were trying to reconcile what they were hearing with the way I carried myself. And that was when I saw him, standing near the doorway, just inside the room, a man I had not noticed before. Tall, composed, wearing a dark suit that did not quite hide the posture of someone trained to stand a certain way. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He just observed, his eyes moving briefly across the table before settling, just for a second, on me, and then away again, like he was not sure yet, like something did not fully make sense. I shifted slightly in my chair, adjusting my posture without thinking, the way years of training had made automatic, shoulders back, stillness controlled, and I saw it again, that same man looking once more, this time a fraction longer, his expression not changing, but his attention sharper, like a small detail had just aligned in his mind. And for the first time that night, something felt different, not louder, not dramatic, just a subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a realization that has not yet been spoken. The room did not change all at once. It never does. It shifted in small, almost invisible ways, like the sound of laughter softening just a fraction, like someone placing their glass down more carefully than before, and I could feel it without looking. That subtle break in the rhythm that had been so comfortable for them just moments earlier. Daniel was still speaking, explaining something about long-term investments, about growth, about what really matters when building a future. But his voice no longer carried the same weight, because someone else was now watching, someone who did not belong to their version of the room. I kept my eyes on my plate for a second longer, then lifted my head just slightly, enough to see him again. The man by the doorway. He had not moved much, but his attention had. It was no longer casual. It was focused, precise, the kind of attention that comes from recognition, not curiosity, and I felt it before I understood it, that quiet shift where something unspoken begins to take shape. Margaret continued speaking, filling the space as she always did. "It is not that we do not appreciate service," she said, her tone measured, controlled. "But at some point, you have to think about what kind of life you are building, especially as a wife." And she glanced at Daniel, as if reinforcing a shared understanding, and he nodded again, still not looking at me, and I noticed how natural it had become for him. Agreeing, aligning, choosing their side without even realizing it. Or maybe he did realize it, and that was worse. I did not interrupt. I did not correct them. I let every word settle exactly where it was meant to, because explaining would have changed nothing. Not here, not like this. And across the table, one of the guests leaned forward slightly and asked, "So what exactly do you do, day to day?" And there it was again, the invitation to reduce, to simplify, to fit me into something smaller, something easier to dismiss. I opened my mouth for a moment, then closed it again, not out of hesitation, but out of choice, because I knew that anything I said would be translated into something else before it reached them. And in that silence, I saw it clearly, the difference between what I was and what they needed me to be. Something manageable, something explainable, something beneath them. The man near the doorway shifted then, just one step forward, not enough to draw attention, but enough to change his angle. And from where he stood, he could now see me more clearly, the way I sat, the way I held still, the way I did not react. And I saw it in his eyes, not surprise, Not confusion, but confirmation. Like a detail he had been searching for had just fallen into place. He looked down briefly, then back at me, his posture straightening almost imperceptibly, and that was when I knew he understood something that no one else in that room did. The conversation continued, but it no longer reached me in the same way. The words became background, distant, because something else had taken their place. A quiet awareness that the moment was shifting, not because of anything I had said, but because of what I had chosen not to say. And then, for a brief second, our eyes met. And he paused, just enough to acknowledge it, just enough to make it real. And then he began to walk toward the table, slow, deliberate, each step measured, not rushed, not hesitant. And no one noticed at first, because why would they? To them, this was still their room, their conversation, their control. But that was already changing, even if they could not see it yet, even if they would not understand it until it was too late. He did not rush, and that was the first thing that made it different. Because in a room like that, people who did not belong usually moved quickly, quietly, trying not to interrupt. But he did not. Each step was steady, controlled, like he was not entering their space, but simply continuing through it. And slowly, almost reluctantly, the conversation began to thin out, not because anyone told it to stop, but because something in the air had shifted enough for people to notice. Margaret paused mid-sentence, her glass still raised slightly, her eyes moving toward him with polite curiosity. Daniel followed her gaze a second later, his expression neutral at first, then slightly confused, like he was trying to place who this man was and why he was walking toward the center of the table with that kind of quiet confidence. I remained still, my hands resting lightly against my lap, my posture unchanged, because by now I understood exactly what was about to happen, even if no one else did. The man stopped just a few feet from me, close enough that the light from above caught the edge of his face, and for a brief second, he did not speak. He simply looked at me, not in the way the others had looked, not with judgment or curiosity, but with recognition, clear and unmistakable, like he was confirming something he already knew. And in that pause, the entire room seemed to hold its breath without realizing it. Someone shifted in their chair, a fork touched a plate softly, then stilled. Margaret lowered her glass slowly, her smile tightening just slightly as she waited for him to explain himself, because in her world, everyone needed a reason to step into the center like that, and he had not given one yet. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with uncertainty. "Can we help you?" And the man did not answer him, not immediately. His attention never left me, and then, with a small, precise movement, he straightened his posture fully, shoulders squared, chin level, the kind of stance that does not need explanation if you understand it. And that was when it happened. He spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that cut clean through the room. "Commander Rachel Carter," he said, his tone formal, exact. "Awaiting your orders, ma'am." And everything stopped. Not gradually, not subtly, but completely. The kind of silence that feels physical, like the air itself has changed weight. No one laughed, no one moved. Even the smallest sounds disappeared, and I could feel it without looking, the way every person at that table recalculated what they thought they knew. Margaret's expression froze, her lips parting slightly, as if she was about to say something, then stopping before the words formed. Daniel's hand remained halfway to his glass, unmoving, his eyes fixed on me now in a way they had not been all night. Not dismissive, not distant, but searching, trying to connect something he had never bothered to understand before. And across the table, the guests who had been so comfortable just moments earlier now sat completely still, their earlier confidence replaced with something quieter, something uncertain. I did not rush to respond. I did not turn it into a performance. I simply met the man's gaze, held it for a brief second, then gave a small nod, controlled, minimal, exactly as it should be, and he acknowledged it just as precisely, stepping back half a pace, returning the space to what it had been. But nothing in that room was the same anymore, because in a single sentence, everything they had reduced me to had been undone, not by explanation, not by defense, but by recognition, and the weight of that realization settled slowly over each of them, heavier with every second that passed. No one spoke for several seconds, and that silence did not feel empty. It felt heavy, like something had settled over the room that no one knew how to move past. Margaret was the first to try, her fingers tightening slightly around her glass before she forced a small smile, the kind she used when something had slipped out of her control. "I think there must be some misunderstanding," she said carefully, her voice softer now, measured, as if choosing each word more cautiously than before. But the man did not respond. He remained where he was, composed, still. His presence no longer something to question, but something to acknowledge. Daniel finally set his glass down, the faint sound against the table louder than it should have been in that silence. He looked at me again, really looked this time, as if trying to see past everything he had assumed, everything he had said, and I could see it in his face. That slow realization, the way his thoughts were catching up to a truth he had never asked about, never cared to understand. "Rachel," he started, but the word did not go anywhere. It just lingered between us, unfinished, uncertain, and I held his gaze for a second before looking away, not out of anger, not out of hesitation, but because there was nothing I needed to explain. Not anymore. Across the table, his brother shifted in his seat, clearing his throat quietly, as if trying to bring the room back to something familiar, something comfortable. But there was no easy return from this, not when the foundation of their assumptions had just been exposed so clearly. One of the guests let out a small, awkward laugh that stopped almost immediately, like even he realized it did not belong anymore. Margaret set her glass down slowly, her posture straighter now, more careful, and she looked at me with a different kind of attention, not warm, not welcoming, but no longer dismissive, as if she was recalculating where I fit in a structure she had always believed she controlled. "You never mentioned," she began, but her sentence faded before it could finish, because she did not know how to frame it without revealing everything that had just changed. I finally spoke then, not loudly, not to reclaim anything, just enough to place my voice back into the room. "There was never a reason to," I said, calm, even, and the simplicity of it seemed to land harder than anything else could have, because it carried no defense, no justification, just a quiet truth that left no space for argument. Daniel leaned back slightly, his hand running through his hair in a small, distracted motion, something he only did when he was trying to process something he did not expect, and I saw it clearly now, the gap between who he thought I was and who I had always been, a gap he had never tried to bridge until this moment forced him to. The man stepped back fully then, giving space again, his role complete, his presence now part of the new reality in the room, not something separate from it, and still, no one knew how to move forward, because every conversation they had started earlier, every joke, every assumption, now sat there, exposed, with nowhere to go. I picked up my glass slowly, not to fill the silence, not to perform, just to continue as if nothing needed to be corrected. And that was when it shifted again, not in the room, but inside me, because for the first time that night, I was no longer waiting for them to understand, no longer hoping for something different. I had already seen what I needed to see, and the realization was quiet, steady, undeniable. Nothing had changed about me, but everything had changed about them, and the way they would look at me from this moment on would never be the same, whether they admitted it or not. The house felt different after that night, not because anything had physically changed, but because something invisible had finally been seen, and once seen, it could not be undone. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, the light coming through the window softer than I remembered, quieter somehow, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the need to explain myself to anyone. Daniel had tried to talk before I left, his voice slower, more careful, like he was stepping through unfamiliar ground, but I listened without interrupting, and when he finished, I realized something simple and steady. Understanding does not erase what has already been revealed, and respect that comes only after exposure is not the same as respect that was always there. I did not argue. I did not accuse. I just told him the truth, that I needed space, not to punish him, but to hear my own thoughts clearly again, and that was something he could not rush or negotiate. Over the next few weeks, everything settled into a different kind of rhythm, quieter, more intentional. I returned to base, to work that had always been clear, structured, honest in a way that did not shift depending on who was watching. And for the first time, I stopped minimizing it when I spoke about it, not because I needed anyone else to validate it, but because I finally understood that I had been the one allowing it to be reduced, little by little, over time. Margaret called once. her tone polite, measured, asking if we could move forward, and I told her calmly that moving forward requires acknowledgement, not just adjustment. And that conversation ended the way it needed to, without anger, without resolution, but with a boundary that had not existed before. And that boundary brought something unexpected, a kind of peace that does not come from everything being perfect, but from knowing where you stand. I learned that silence is not weakness when it is chosen, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people reveal who they are without interruption, because in that space, truth has a way of becoming undeniable. And I also learned that love, real love, does not ask you to become smaller so it can feel more comfortable. It does not ask you to explain your worth in rooms that have already decided it for you. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt that quiet pressure to shrink yourself just to be accepted, I want you to know that you are not wrong for feeling it, and you are not wrong for stepping away from it. Protecting your emotional space is not selfish. It is necessary. Protecting your financial independence, your career, your sense of identity, those are not optional things. They are the foundation that allows you to stand steady when everything around you shifts. Trust that feeling inside you when something does not sit right. That is not doubt. That is awareness. Some people call it intuition. Some call it faith. Some call it the voice God placed in you to guide you when logic alone is not enough. And whatever you choose to call it, do not ignore it, because it will speak quietly at first, but it will always be honest. I am not saying the path after that night was easy. It was not, but it was clearer, and clarity is something you can build a life on, even when everything else feels uncertain. So if you are here, listening, carrying something heavy that no one else seems to see, I want to thank you for staying, for trusting this story enough to hear it all the way through. You are not alone in that feeling, and you do not have to lose yourself to keep anyone else comfortable. If this story meant something to you, you can share your thoughts, your city, your time, or simply stay present with it. And if you choose to follow along, you are always welcome here. My name is Rachel Carter. I am 42 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this. Never let anyone define your worth in a room where they have not taken the time to understand who you truly are.